So how does responsive design with Bootstrap actually work? Well, we use something called the grid system. I'm going to scroll down the Bootstrap docs here. And if at any point in this video you want a little bit more detail, just pause the video and have a read of the Bootstrap docs. I'll give you an overview, but they've got a bit more detail there if you need it. I'll start off by talking about media queries. You'll notice that when we did that exercise of making the screen smaller, there were points at which everything changed. So at this point nothing is really changing, it's just getting wider and wider. And then at some point it snaps and changes into a different layout. So those points are known as breakpoints. And in Bootstrap you've got 4 different areas or 4 different screen sizes with 3 breakpoints. And you can see what those breakpoints are here. We've got 768 pixels, so that defines a tablet or a phone, something small. And then above that you get a larger tablet, maybe a tablet in desktop orientation, or a small desktop. And then you've got 992 pixels and upwards is a standard desktop. And then 1200 pixels and upwards is a large desktop. So you've got these 4 types of devices, 4 screen sizes, and those breakpoints, the 768, 992 and 1200, are the number of pixels that define the gaps between those devices. So when we switch from what we consider to be a phone to a tablet, and then from a tablet to a desktop, and then from a desktop to a large desktop. So essentially what Bootstrap is doing is applying different CSS, different styles, to the different screen sizes. And the main way it does that is with grids. So if we just switch back up here, the grid system is very widely used. It's beyond Bootstrap. There are many other grid systems that you can use. You can create your own grid systems. But most grid systems use 12 columns because they allow you to then create different sized chunks of text or content within that, depending on how you want to split the screen up. So let's scroll down and get a quick example. So here, for example, we've got 12 different columns. Don't worry about the col-md1, we'll see what that means in a minute, but essentially we've got 12 different columns with a tiny bit of content in each. If I then make that screen smaller, they switch down. So that was the 768 breakpoint there, the phone breakpoint. And when we make the screen smaller than that, we've then got stacked divs rather than horizontally laid out divs. And similarly with the next line, we've got 8 and 4 there. So we've got a column which is 8 little columns wide, and we've got a column which is 4 little columns wide. Below that we've got 3 columns of equal width, but for all of those, when we bring them down below that 768 breakpoint, they become stacked. So that's a good basic way to get a decent layout on every device. So let's try and implement that ourselves. We'll switch back over to our Bootstrap 101 template. And open my file. There we go. So how can we implement this grid system? We'll keep the Hello World H1 for the moment. Let's just switch back over to the Bootstrap docs and take a quick look at this. So we put our rows into a container div, and then each row will then have a row class and another class which gives it an idea of how wide that row is. So let's take a look at the code here. You can see we've got a div class of row there, and then lots of, or in this case 12, little divs within that. So let's start by recreating one of those. We'll keep the simple one at the moment. We'll look at this bottom one, which is just two equal sized divs. So first, we'll create our container class, which contains everything within. And then we're going to create a row. And then within that row, we'll create a div with a class of colmd6. And we'll just put some content in there. Now, if you're wondering what the MD stands for, it stands for medium-sized desktop, or medium device, sorry, which is desktops. You can use different class prefixes depending on whether you're focusing on extra small devices, the phones, or the small devices, the tablets, the medium devices, or the large devices. Generally speaking, to keep things pretty simple, we can focus on the medium devices, and we don't need to do anything particularly specific to work for phones unless we want to do something away from the norm. So let's go back to here. So we have our content there. I'm just copying and pasting that to get another one. So let's have a look. So at the moment our content divs are stacked because we're below the 768 pixels. If we then stretch it out, you can see now we're getting a bit of padding because we're going into the tablet zone. And then once we go above the next breakpoint, we're now splitting into two 50% divs. Great. Now we can make that a little bit clearer by perhaps giving these a box class as well, and then just styling that so we can see the background as well. So let's just give it a background color of a nice light grey. D3, D3, D3. That'll do it. And we'll have a border of 1px solid grey. So you can see these divs are being stretched right to the edges of the screen there. And they've also got a nice little bit of padding within them. And then now we're in the tablet area, so they're still stacked, but there's a nice bit of padding either side, or a nice margin either side. And now they've split into two 50% divs, which then change slightly in terms of their padding when we get to that last extra large breakpoint. Great. So let's just play around with this a little bit and create one more row. In fact, I'll give you a quick challenge. Can you change this content so instead of having two even divs, we've got three even divs? I hope you managed it. All we need to do is copy a third div in there and then change our number of columns on our class to 4. Let's just get rid of our previous ones there. So there's our 3 divs. And then they stretch out nicely. So the 3 div is a very common one on things like landing pages and home pages, because it allows you to give a nice bit of content, possibly with an image on the top, or a reason why to use your product or app or whatever it might be. And then that does break down very nicely onto mobiles and smaller tablets. So that's how a responsive grid system works in Bootstrap. I definitely recommend playing around with that a little bit yourself and trying out different widths of columns. And indeed, if you want to go into it in a bit more detail, read the Bootstrap docs. There's a lot more you can do with this that I'm not going to go into in great detail, but if you want to learn more about responsive design, I definitely recommend it. Then have a look at the Bootstrap docs there and try things out for yourself.